Tonight, the Defence Department starts dismissing SAS soldiers in the wake of the Afghanistan war crimes inquiry. A Melbourne University academic finally released from an Iran jail as part of a possible prisoner swap deal. More repatriation flights planned to get Australians home for a COVID normal Christmas. And God gets his hand back. Football icon Diego Maradona dies at the age of 60. Good evening, I'm Yvonne Yong with ABC News. The Defence Department has started dismissing members of the Special Air Services Regiment who were implicated in the Afghanistan war crimes inquiry. At least 10 have been issued termination notices after they were suspected of being accessories or witnesses to alleged murders carried out by colleagues. Some of the families of those killed unlawfully say they want the alleged perpetrators tried in Afghanistan. Mark Willesee has his exclusive report.
8 years have passed since Miraz Gula's son was shot and killed during an SAS raid, but she still grieves.
How is it not cruel that they came and martyred my son? He had not committed any crime.
An investigation by Afghan human rights officials found her son, Mirza Khan, was an unarmed civilian who was unlawfully killed during the 2012 raid on the village of Sarkoom.
They unleashed their dog on him and later shot him from close range.
Hazratullah was just a boy when the Australian SAS raided Sarkoom. By the time they left, his father, Haji Sada, would be dead.
I was about 10 or 12 years old. My father was responsible for all our affairs. Today, my elder brother and I are struggling to support our family.
As part of its more than 4-year inquiry, the Inspector General of Defence investigated the killing of Haji Sada after allegations the old man was beaten to death by a senior SAS operator inside the village mosque. One of the Inspector General's recommendations is compensation for the families of the Afghan victims of unlawful killings, something welcomed by Haji Sada's eldest son.
I need justice and also expect compensation for the loss and pain they have caused us. They martyred my father and destroyed our hopes.
The Inspector General's report recommends 19 current and serving Special Forces soldiers be prosecuted for war crimes. But the Sarkoom families would like the men alleged to have killed their relatives to face Afghan justice.
Because these crimes were committed in Afghanistan, these soldiers should be prosecuted according to Islamic law. If it is according to Australian law, they must imprison them for life.
Any prosecutions could take years and will take place on Australian soil. Mark Willesee, ABC News.
Melbourne University academic Kylie Moore-Gilbert is on her way home after more than 2 years behind bars in Iran. The price of her freedom was 3 Iranian terrorists released from a Thailand jail in a remarkable prisoner swap that the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister won't confirm. But the ABC has uncovered clues suggesting an Australian plane was used to transport the terrorist from Bangkok to Iran in exchange for Dr. Moore-Gilbert.
Freedom after more than 800 days in prison. Kylie Moore-Gilbert's ordeal in Iran over, but not before a forced statement in Farsi.
I came to Iran 2 years and 3 months ago. I visited a few Arab countries and a Zionist regime.
Zionist regime being Iran's disparaging name for Israel, Tehran's mortal enemy.
She is an extraordinarily intelligent, strong and courageous woman.
Dr. Moore-Gilbert, a Middle East specialist, was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for espionage, charges she strenuously denied. Her freedom achieved through a prisoner swap, with 3 Iranians involved in a Bangkok assassination plot targeting Israeli diplomats, one of whom lost his legs when his bomb detonated.
The Australian government doesn't acknowledge or confirm any such arrangements.
Kylie Moore-Gilbert has thanked the Australian government for securing her release. In a statement, she said despite being subjected to injustices,
I came to Iran as a friend and with friendly intentions, and depart Iran with those same sentiments, not only still intact, but strengthened.
Details of her extraction are closely guarded, but the ABC understands this private plane, previously used for special government missions, left Canberra early Monday, stopping in Bangkok before flying to Tehran. The Airbus 319 then flew to Doha, spending a day there before returning to Bangkok and then back to Tehran for the prisoner swap on Wednesday, flying out 90 minutes later back to Doha. Iranian footage suggests the Australian plane was used to transport the Iranian terrorists before collecting Dr. Moore Gilbert.
I'm not going to comment on diplomatic discussions with other governments.
To release Kylie Moore Gilbert, Australia received generous help from allies like Thailand. But giving in to Iran's hostage diplomacy sets a worrying precedent when the citizen of one country can be used as leverage over another nation. Then again, as one senior government figure told the ABC, what was the alternative? Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
For the tens of thousands of Australians stuck overseas due to the pandemic, the best Christmas present would be a flight home. More are coming, including 2 international flights to Tasmania in as many weeks. But there won't be seats for everyone this year, despite the Prime Minister's promises.
Home for the holidays. 150 Australians touched down in Canberra before being taken to hotels to emerge just in time for Christmas. Others aren't so lucky.
Not knowing how or when we may be able to return home is exhausting.
David Jeffries fronted a parliamentary hearing from Canada where he's been since March visiting his sick mum.
Australian bills haven't stopped just because we're not home.
There are almost 37,000 Australians currently registered as wanting to return home from overseas.
This is my daughter Ailish.
Until recently, Carly was one of them, turning to social media in an attempt to get home from London.
Being locked out of your country, you've been abandoned.
Speaking from his own quarantine, the Prime Minister's now conceding a previous promise that everyone would be back by Christmas is no longer possible.
The ability to get people home to Australia depends on the available quarantine capacity.
But there is movement. Melbourne will soon start accepting international arrivals again, while the government wants to bring back 29,000 Australians between now and Christmas. To help facilitate that, it'll soon announce extra repatriation flights, priority given to the more than 8,000 Australians classed as vulnerable.
Donald Trump managed to bring home 100,000 Americans.
I'm sure if we asked the Australian public, they would not want to have the same sort of pandemic experience.
A medical opinion with political edge. Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
2 new coronavirus cases have brought Adelaide's Parafield cluster to 31. Among them, a high school student who bought a pizza from a business at the centre of the outbreak. The second new case tested positive in quarantine.
Another school closed for a deep clean, this time Woodville High. Students told to stay home after a classmate tested positive to COVID-19.
We have required a large number of children and families at Woodville High to quarantine because of this.
That direction was narrowed this afternoon to include only Year 9 students and teachers. It's believed the girl caught the virus after ordering a pizza from the Woodville Pizza Bar on the 14th of November.
That was an infectious period.
If it's from the pizza bar, why was she at school on Monday?
The Chief Public Health Officer defended the student who, based on SA Health directions, should have been in quarantine.
This young person has done absolutely nothing wrong. She's followed the directions and within her understanding of what she needed to do.
A similar story about picking up a pizza forced the state into lockdown last week, but health authorities say things have changed this time.
We're in a different situation. We've had that pause. We also have some restrictions in place at the moment. This exposure was way back at the beginning.
I'm not too worried about it. I think the authorities are on top of everything.
A site for a pop-up clinic in Woodville is still being chosen. Testing numbers have remained high and health authorities still believe the state is on track for eased restrictions next week.
I think it's been made pretty clear that we're still aiming for a Christmas that is as normal as possible.
And a QR code check-in system should be up and running by Tuesday.
These will be mandatory in certain locations. We will give people time to get on board.
It isn't clear when international travellers will be able to get on board back to Adelaide.
We now will be working with the Commonwealth on a gradual resumption of those repatriation flights, but we're not going to do it until we get the OK from SA Health.
One critical factor, the overhaul of the state's Medi-Hotel system. Questions remain over how the virus was able to get out of the Peppers Hotel and whether that could have been prevented. The Health Minister today revealed he hasn't read the recommendations from Victoria's inquiry into its failings.
Do you think you should have been briefed in relation to the Victorian inquiry into hotel quarantine?
The Victorian inquiry came out recently. I'm particularly mindful of the national review by Ms Holton, which went to National Cabinet.
The Minister may not have read the document, but senior SA Health executives say they have. Isabel Damon, ABC News, Adelaide.
Telstra has admitted to breaking consumer law and is facing a fine of up to $50 million. The telco's chief has apologised after sales staff in 5 regional stores exploited vulnerable Indigenous consumers.
Last year, Broome mum Caitlin Rowe spoke out about her crippling Telstra debt worth more than $2,000. Today, she's celebrating.
That's a weight lifted off my shoulder, not only mine but other people's too.
The full extent of the problems with Telstra's sales practices has been revealed by an ACCC investigation.
These were extremely vulnerable consumers. They were sold products they did not understand, they couldn't afford, and often they did not need.
The ACCC found 5 Telstra stores in South Australia, Western Australia and the Northern Territory sold unaffordable phone plans to more than 100 vulnerable customers. In some cases, they were sold premium services with overseas data allowances, typically costing $320 a month. The average debt was $7,400 and many were chased by debt collectors.
I really hope that this will be the end of a very unfortunate period and the start of it being easier for financial counsellors to get justice for remote Indigenous people, because it's been a battle.
Telstra is refunding debts with interest, is allowing most customers to keep their devices and has appointed a customer advocate.
Getting things right 100% of the time is incredibly hard in a large company like Telstra. However, when we do not, it is incumbent upon us to be transparent about it, admit our mistakes.
Telstra and the ACCC have agreed to a $50 million penalty. That still needs federal court approval. It would be the second highest penalty ever imposed under Australian consumer law. Amy Bainbridge, ABC News.
Donald Trump has pardoned his former national security advisor, describing his act of clemency as a great honour. The US president also told Michael Flynn to have a truly fantastic Thanksgiving. But for many Americans, that's unlikely, as COVID-19 cases hit a daily average of more than 170,000.
Americans packed airports and filled planes. Millions ignored dire health warnings against travel for the annual Thanksgiving holiday, even as the US recorded its highest daily death toll in 6 months. The pandemic has now claimed more than 250,000 American lives.
The look of happiness on her face was amazing.
Shirley Strang among them. The 87-year-old lost her battle with the disease 2 days after being discharged from hospital.
The following morning, we got a call from the facility saying that she had passed.
Her son Jim spoke his last words to her through the window of her nursing home.
You know, I think the message is the virus is real. The scary thing is that even with healthy people, it can take its turn for the worst.
More than 9 months into the pandemic and queuing for food is still the harsh reality for many Americans. Most we've spoken to are still without work. More than half those coming here have never been here before.
Now I lost my job. It's not easy. I have my kids, no money for food.
While the nation's future leader is promising America's back, he's warned against complacency.
This is the moment where we need to steel our spines, redouble our efforts, and recommit ourselves to the fight.
Donald Trump still hasn't given up hope of overturning the election result.
We won it by a lot.
Imparting that message by phone to Pennsylvania Republicans. The US president also had a Thanksgiving gift of his own.
Some breaking news.
Pardoning his former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who twice pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI during the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 US election. If infections spike over the Thanksgiving holiday as health authorities fear, America could be entering one of its darkest winters in living memory. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Virginia.
An investigation is underway into the treatment of autistic children at a school in Sydney's south. Penshurst West Public School is accused of locking young autistic students in a small room if they misbehave. And when a mother took on the school, she was banned from the premises. Josh Bavis has his exclusive report.
Bill and Katerina Ferrikos have only wanted what's best for their boys.
I'm not just doing it for Yanni, I'm doing it for all the children.
Their son Yanni goes to Penshurst West Public, a school with 3 dedicated classes for autistic children and students with other special needs. But they became concerned after learning about a small room used for students with behavioural problems. It was fitted with external locks.
It's not fair on our son and all the other children in that unit.
They were told by another parent that their child saw Yanni being placed in the lockable room.
And he was crying, holding his 2 Mickeys and asking for Mummy.
Another parent also noticed a bolt on the door in the back of a photo of the classroom on social media.
That locks are even being discussed as part of, an education system for children with a disability. It's just not appropriate in any way, shape or form.
Their concerns got worse after Katerina Ferrikos and another parent confronted the school. 2 police officers hand-delivered to her a notice from the principal informing her she was banned from school grounds following the confrontation.
I'm not ashamed to have a child with ASD. I'm ashamed for them.
The Education Department is now investigating the small locked room and how Yanni's mother was treated.
These serious allegations point to the fact that departmental policy and procedure appears to have not been followed, and we need to allow that thorough investigation to take place.
Advocating and having a voice for your child is not a crime, and I won't stop till my last breath.
Since allegations were raised, the school's principal's been temporarily stood aside and another teacher moved to other duties with new leadership brought in pending the investigation. And renovations are underway to remove any remaining locks, which should never have been there in the first place. Josh Bavis, ABC News, Sydney.
Western Australia's corruption watchdog has alleged 2 former Upper House Liberal MPs engaged in serious misconduct by using public funds for their personal lifestyle expenses. Examples include using allowances on lavish dinners and strip clubs, as well as paying a lover as a sham employee.
Nigel Hallett and Brian Ellis are no longer members of Parliament, but their spending habits while they were MPs are now in the spotlight.
Our work to date indicates that there has been serious misconduct by members of the Upper House in connection with their electorate allowance.
In an interim report last year, the CCC found former Upper House MP Phil Edmund misused his allowance, and its latest report found he wasn't alone. The CCC found Nigel Hallett employed an electorate officer for half a day a week over 7 years, during which she was paid nearly $64,000.
It does not appear that she did any real work during that period. She didn't open or send any emails from her DPC account in that period.
The Commission found the tone of their messages very intimate, such as this one. Love you, Dal, hope you slept well. Could cuddle up, maybe let you take advantage. And Mr Hallett used his electorate allowance to give her gifts, including expensive meals, tickets to a Neil Diamond concert and an iPad. The report alleges both he and Brian Ellis engaged in significant ongoing abuse of their allowance, including on a wine tour of South Australia. And in April 2016, Mr Ellis claimed a $2,000 bill at the Penthouse Club in Northbridge. The CCC said Mr Ellis's evidence about the spending defies belief and was an abuse of office. The CCC says the investigation is not over. It's been stalled by a court battle with the Legislative Council over access to Mr Edmonds' laptop. The Attorney-General says he's concerned by the report's revelations that sitting MPs were contacted to warn them about a dirt file on the laptop.
There's a number of questions that the new leader of the Liberal Party needs to answer.
The reality is that the CCC hasn't named those members of Parliament. The reality is I don't know that those members of Parliament exist within the Liberal Party.
The CCC says its investigation has been impeded by some witnesses.
Withholding records relevant to the investigation, destroying evidence, intentionally and materially flouting the confidentiality obligations of non-disclosure orders.
Those witnesses may be referred for prosecution. Alicia O'Flaherty, ABC News.
The New South Wales Premier has admitted her government engaged in pork barrelling in the lead up to the last election. Gladys Berejiklian made the startling comment in defence of $250 million spent in community grants.
Under the glare of creatures frozen in time, the Premier has admitted to an ageless political play.
The term pork barrelling is common parlance, and if that's the accusation made on this occasion, well then I'm happy to accept that commentary.
That pork barrelling was $250 million in grants in the lead up to the last election. Most of it went to projects in government-held seats. The documents were shredded, but digital copies have now been recovered.
This is a laser-guided attempt to buy the election. Before the 2019 election, this money was rolled out in the seats that the Liberals were desperate to hold.
The documents show the grants went to the Premier for approval and reveal she was told to enable this funding to go out, you will need to approve updated funding guidelines.
They worked backwards and bodged up the guidelines in order to have them approved.
She is centrally involved. For months she's denied that. These documents today make it clear she is right in the middle of this scandal.
Gladys Berejiklian remains adamant she didn't provide the final sign-off.
I was consulted, I was provided advice, and ultimately it would have been up to the Office of Local Government.
For the Premier to make such a startling admission about pork barrelling, she could be hoping that her straight talk might deflect from the act itself. But it does put at risk her political integrity.
This sets impossibly low standards. If you're using taxpayers' funding to win an election and the Premier thinks that this is okay, it's not.
It's not an illegal practice.
But how the grant scheme was run has been referred to the corruption watchdog. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
Frustratingly for many women, the national gender pay gap has barely budged. That's according to the latest annual snapshot by the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. But it wasn't all bad, with some employers prioritising flexible work.
Tali Moore wears a couple of different hats. The 26-year-old construction worker is also a professional athlete.
I've been working hard and working to make sure that I can make that dream come true for the Australian softball team.
Her industry isn't known for flexible work arrangements, but Tali says her company is different.
It really helps me to have work be flexible because then I'm able to not stress about having to be at work from 9 to 5 or 7 to 7, depending on what day it is.
The average gender pay gap is more than $25,000 a year. And while that's remained stagnant, there have been some gains, like more flexible work options, improved access to parental leave, and some workplaces are developing better responses to domestic violence. But the report itself also has gaps.
Unfortunately, because we don't record statistics on the way that women of colour experience the gender pay gap in particular, we are actually masking the broader inequalities.
Inequalities too for women not in full-time work.
Precarious employment, those people in part-time and casual employment, are always considered the low-hanging fruit when we're looking at cutting costs.
Year after year, women are faced with the same story. Men still take home a bigger pay packet across every industry and occupation. Understandably, it makes many women want to turn away from just more bad news. But this important snapshot exists to call out that inequality, and perhaps one day it won't even be needed. Talia Roy, ABC News, Canberra.
To sport now, in the football world is paying tribute to Argentinian icon Diego Maradona, who's died aged 60 from a heart attack. Well, tonight his body's lying in state at Government House in Buenos Aires as thousands of fans stream past to pay their respects. Maradona dazzled the world with his sublime skills, winning a World Cup in 1986. But he also led a life that was never far from controversy.
He was arguably the greatest ever. Unbelievable! Unquestionably a genius. Undoubtedly flawed. The devil and angel of Maradona's footballing character were on display during one memorable World Cup quarter-final against England in 1986. First came the infamous Hand of God goal.
And it was a handball, no question about that.
It's not cheating. Then, just 4 minutes later, came this moment of sheer brilliance as he scored what became known as the goal of the century. Winning the '86 World Cup was the highlight of Maradona's career, one that began as a mercurial talent on the dusty streets of a Buenos Aires slum and took him to the greatest heights. The Socceroos captain, Paul Wade, witnessed that talent firsthand as Argentina played Australia for a spot in the 1994 World Cup finals.
And I remember looking out of the corner of my eye and going, wow, you are only small. You look massive to me.
And he was given the job of marking the famous number 10.
He didn't move very far, but when he did move, it was lightning.
He retired soon after, and excess became as much of his life as his footballing genius. But without the game, his weight ballooned as his addictions, cocaine, alcohol and food took over. As news of his death spread, fans flocked to his house in Argentina, where he's revered. The two men he's most often compared to paid glowing tributes. Brazil's Pelé wrote, "I've lost a great friend and the world has lost a legend." While Argentina's current superstar, Lionel Messi, tweeted, "He is gone, but he's not left us, because Diego is eternal." Diego Maradona, dead at just 60, but with a legacy like no other.
Heat remains the feature for much of the country as we move into Friday, and it just becomes more extensive as we move through the weekend. We've also got the potential of some dry thunderstorms with this trough through southern parts of the Territory into Queensland and northern New South Wales. A little bit of instability along the New South Wales range is also bringing the possibility of an isolated thunderstorm there. But it really is the far north of Queensland, the Northern Territory and the Kimberley in Western Australia that showers and thunderstorms are far more likely. We've also got a few showers about the northern half of Tasmania and then later in the day about the west coast. But at this stage, the only capital looking at the potential of some rainfall is Darwin, and there is quite a good chance that it could see some worthwhile falls.
That's the latest from ABC News. I'm Yvonne Yong. Have a good evening.
It doesn't change who you are.
The Prime Minister told Parliament
justice and humanity.
Hello and welcome to 7:30. Scores of people across the country, mainly retirees,